This channel is supported by Truefire. Truefire is an online library of lessons from some of my favourite players. There's thousands of lessons on there. You can use the promo code JNC40 to get 40% off of any of their courses.
I was just driving along in the car yesterday, and I've recently bought another Nobels ODR1, and I was thinking, like, what are some pedals that I've bought over the years that I think were kind of overhyped, or, you know, commanding prices that are maybe a little bit crazy. And so I kind of wanted to do a video on some of these pedals, and you know, let me know your favourites in the comments. If you've used any of these, if you've bought into any of the hype. I have owned all of these pedals, so that's why I feel like I can talk about it. I still own some of them, and so it's not necessarily saying that they're not great pedals, it's just that there's like a bubble of hype built around these things. So I think the first example of this for me is the Ibanez TS10. There was this time when these were really popping off, and probably still even are, due to being on John Mayer's board. And basically they're a tube screamer. They've got some subtle differences. Of all the tube screamer variants, you know, from Ibanez, this one seems to be the most different. There is one other alternative that is pretty close to it, which is the Ibanez metal screamer. They do sound really pretty good for certain things, so I would say, you know, if you're thinking about getting an Ibanez TS10, you probably won't regret it. They are a great sounding pedal, but I think they're quite a lot of money now for what is essentially pretty close to any other tube screamer. So the metal screamer is a perfectly decent alternative, which I did also A/B with the Gritador from Brown Amplification, and that one actually does a really decent job of being that sort of style tube screamer as well. It's kind of a little bit more compressed than other tube screamers, a little bit softer potentially, and this has a bit more bass as well than a TS10, but sounds really good. I've had 3 of these pedals, the Klon KTR. Now there was a time where you could sell these for like £700-ish, and I think that was why I ended up getting rid of it, is because I'd never really got on with the Klon circuit in general. The Klon KTR, a different version. The Klons he'd stopped building for a while, Bill Finnegan that is. Of course, like the Klon itself is probably like the perfect example of a hyped up pedal which goes for crazy money, but the Klon KTR kind of did that in a junior kind of way as well, right? And I think even now the Klon KTR has different diodes in it, so sort of makes you question whether there was always a little bit of mystique around this. So I think Klon KTR for me, I've had 3 of them, sold them all for more than I paid for them, but never really totally got what that was about. And I think even though, you know, it's printed on the pedal itself, you know, this hype was not of my making, but I think Klon goes on the list. Klon KTR, I've not played a real Klon. If you were thinking of getting a Klon KTR, I don't know if they're still stupid money, but the Cherryotone Centaur was a fairly decent alternative at a fairly reasonable price. J-Rocket, also with the Archer, reasonably priced version of a Klon. You'd even get a Mosky if you feel like it. I'd put this out of my head. The Vemuram TSV808 absolutely has got to go on this list. But this was essentially a combination of a Tube Screamer and a Jan Ray from Ibanez and Vemuram. They initially sold, I think, for £400, but the price has kind of skyrocketed. The unfortunate thing with this is that these pedals sound absolutely incredible and look really cool too, like all Vemuram pedals, but I think a pretty good example of, like, it is a Tube Screamer / Jan Ray. Do you just get one of those and be just as happy? Quite possibly, yes. But a super limited edition, one of these things where it's like commands very high prices. I think one ended up on a John Mayer board at one point or another. Also, if you're looking for some way to get out of like a little bit of a stagnated practice routine or something like that, I would recommend checking out some Truefire courses. In particular, I'm thinking of Tim Miller's creative arpeggio design, and this could give you something which is not super theory heavy, but sort of getting you thinking about the fretboard in a more physical way, and some approaches to some arpeggios that might be fresh and new to you. It's got this 2-1-2 arpeggio thing which still rings in the back of my head. So like if you had a pentatonic, you skip, so you go 2 1 2 1 2 1. You get these new sounding sort of arpeggios that aren't, you know, super theory heavy or anything. I really recommend that. You can use the code JNC40 to get 40% off of that course, or JNC100 to get $100 off of their all access pass for the entire year. You could jump into Robin Ford stuff, Tim Lurch's stuff, Tim Miller, etc, etc. Moving on to some other things like the Royal Overdrive. I think you could still buy these for about £700. Now this is another one where it's like, this is a lot of hype, and you saw them on YouTube with Pete Thorne and that pedal show and stuff like that, but I would say that this is the most squishy feeling drive pedal that I've ever tried. You know, Peter Van Wilden himself said this got like the elastic feel of tubes and stuff, which I don't necessarily associate with Dumble, but I would say that, yeah, these are very expensive but somewhat different to other pedals in that there is a high component count in there, and when you get it in your hand it feels like a brick. It's a pretty substantial piece of kit, so possibly overhyped, but I would say that of all the things here, that this is the most sort of substantial feeling in the hand. I would have thought the Zendrive was overhyped until I bought an original one. Now these aren't as much money as they used to be, and I think these did go through a period of being super expensive. They were all handmade by Alfonso, right, in the first place, and I think some of them were gooped. If it's good enough for Robin Ford, then it's probably good enough for you. I've not had the same kind of experiences with the more recent Love Pedal ones, but this one in particular, Jake had one as well. The Zendrive, I think, is a great pedal that for a time was overhyped, but I think the prices have sort of gone back down a little bit, and there are loads and loads of clones out there like Warm Audio, you know, lots and lots of clones. Leave your favourite in the comments if you've got any. Now, the Nobels ODR1, these are going for crazy money. They're kind of not that easy to find. Jake was talking to a friend in Nashville who's still not ever seen one in real life. I've got 2 of them now, and I think they are a really great pedal, and I think quite an interesting part of history. They used to go for not very much money at all. I think Rob Harris from Jamiroquai bought his for about 80 quid. He was saying to me, if you're thinking about getting one, I would say give it a try. But if you're thinking I just want that tone without, you know, buying into the hype, then the ODR Mini is a really decent little pedal. Maybe a bit more bass, maybe not exactly the same when you A/B them, but then neither are the ODR ones when you put them side by side. They sort of vary a little bit. So if you want that kind of thing without the hype, the Nobels ODR Mini has been on, I think, John Shanks's board, has been on Sol Philcock's Littlefield's board. The Noble stuff that they're still making to this day is actually, you know, free of hype and sounds decent in my opinion. The last thing I would say is that I've got this as an old 80s Boss SD1. Is it worth buying really old pedals in general? I guess is kind of the real question on this. So David Beebe found this for me in Portland, and I was sort of going through a bit of a phase of really liking some old, well, Boss SD1. I think I did a video on it, and then he was like, oh, there's an old one here, and I was like, try it. It's kind of a cool piece of history, and you know, Boss things might outlast us as humans, but you know, just a standard off-the-shelf SD1 is probably going to sound very similar to this, right? So old pedals in general, I guess, is the question. Is it worth actually buying them? I've also got an old Ibanez SD9 from the 80s, and this one Tony from up the road put a lot of time and hard work into. This doesn't really work bypassed. It's got some sort of issue with it. So is it really worth having these old pedals that maybe look cool and are a cool bit of history, but can you actually rely on them on a board? Maybe not. And if you pay over the odds for them, like I think this one was quite cheap, like 80 quid I think, and this one was about 200. You know, I could have bought 6 SD1s for that, right? Or a bunch of Maxon SD9s. So old pedals in general, you know, I think there's a bit of hype and mystique around some of this stuff, which is maybe not necessary.